After testing the primer, try to use your hand in straight lines to make the priming more proper. Try to keep a distance about 6 to 8 inches. Don't get too close because you will create drops or collections of priming which will create small drops that will damage the process, and then you will have to sand over and over again just to fix that up. So try to keep it straight, see that it's not collecting too much priming in any area, and you will be good. You don't have to follow a consecutive plan like you do with painting. In general, you have two kinds of primer. You have the regular primer that goes for metals, and you have a flexible primer that you can use when you're doing metals and plastics. You see, plastics tend to have a extension and retraction that works with heat. So when it gets hot, it expands, and when it gets cold, it shrinks down. That up and down on the plastic will make a regular primer crack down. So if you're doing a bike like I am in this process, I will highly recommend you to use a flexible primer. If you're using a car where you have mostly metal, you don't really need to use that kind of things. Just keep that in mind before you start your process. When doing painting, always try to start from one corner of the piece that you're going to work and advance with the paint. Make straight lines, curvy lines depending on the shape, but always go advancing to the other edge that is not painted. That will give you some more consistency and avoid some spots. Try to be very light in the first coat of paint. Okay, so we just finished giving the third coat of paint. We start after the priming with a wet sanding to make it smooth. So we proceed to give the first coat of paint. To that, we let it wait between 20 to 30 minutes to dry up. We give a second coat, we wait again 20 to 30 minutes. We give a third coat, then we're going to let it dry until tomorrow probably to give it a wet sand to make it smooth. We will give another coat of paint, let it wait for a few hours, give it another wet sanding, let it dry, clean it, and then we will proceed to give the clear coating, probably two with a separate time between an hour to each. Then we will sand it again with a really high grade, about a 2 to 3,000. We will polish it and we will be done. After finishing the third coat of paint and before the fourth one, we are going to give a wet sanding. Use a high grit paper. I'm using right now a 2000 grit paper to smooth the paint up before the fourth coat. Use a sand block inside the sandpaper to have a straight surface. If you're using something that has a lot of shapes like my tank, try to cut the sand block to make it smaller, to make it smoother and easier to fit in the areas that are kind of tight. So finally we're going to apply the high gloss clear coating to make it look like real fabric paint. Hit it. Try to be generous with the coats. In gloss coat, you will have a large spray of areas, so you won't need to apply that much. But still try to give it a good coat so you can keep it at one. Give it in a second coat, have to wait at least an hour before that one, and then you will have to let it dry for at least 2 days before installing it so everything will be dry. And even in that case, usually most people try to recommend you to do 7 days before doing any installation.